Welcome to 1+1. I'm Rosie Batty. Anaesthetist and cave diver Dr. Harry Harris was thrust into the spotlight after rescuing a young soccer team trapped in a cave in Thailand in 2018. Dr. Harris made the call about how to sedate the team in order to dive them to safety. That mammoth operation would change Dr. Harris's world, and in becoming the 2019 Joint Australian of the Year, his adventures would continue. We spoke about that title and what it means to have the whole world watching.
A dozen members of a youth football team and their coach are missing after they entered a cave in northern Thailand.
A massive rescue effort has been launched.
Investigators believe the teenage boys...
The belongings of a young soccer team that's disappeared.
Somewhere inside, the boys are trapped by rising waters from heavy weekend rains.
They're in the right place. They could survive for 5-6 days.
I cannot expect that how long, but every minute is important.
It's now more than a week since the 12 young footballers and their coach embarked on their adventure.
How many of you? 13? Brilliant.
This was the moment they were found.
Getting them out will mean a 4-kilometre journey through a dangerous labyrinth.
An extraordinary rescue. The most challenging conditions.
At the front line is an Adelaide anaesthetist tasked with deciding if the boys are well enough.
The doctor from Adelaide has been an essential part of the...
Selfless, he is extremely thoughtful.
Dr. Harry is very good. He's got a very good bedside manner. He's got a very bouncy Australian accent, and they seem to find that quite relaxing and reassuring.
What seemed impossible here just days ago is an extraordinary success.
Australian of the Year 2019 will be shared by Dr. Richard Harris and Craig Challen, who are both medical experts, elite cave divers, and have been friends for 20 years. Called upon to save 12 young soccer players and their coach in a Thai cave, the odds were low, but the operation proved a total success.
Dr. Harry Harris, welcome to 1+1.
Rosie, it's so great to catch up with you again.
When you became Australian of the Year, you were terrified of public speaking, and yet here we are sitting down for a television interview. What's changed?
Don't let this calm external demeanour fool you, Rosie. There's still turmoil on the inside, but I think once you're Australian of the Year, you know there's nowhere to hide. So practice makes perfect, I think, is the answer to that.
It's a bit of baptism by fire, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you expect to be made Australian of the Year? Had you planned for it? Did you even want it?
So they're all very good questions, and I think you'd get the same response, I think, from anyone who was in our position, who was given this amazing award. And the answer is definitely no, not expecting. In fact, I put a bet on at the betting agency on Kurt Fearnley, who was one of the other candidates. So no, definitely not expecting it. Prepared for it, I mean, everyone was telling us that it was a definite possibility.
I remember when I was nominated and going up for the awards, and I looked around at the people I was nominated with, and I thought, not a hope would it be me. And in actual fact, none of my family or friends ever thought it was going to be me either. Did you have the same kind of imposter syndrome? You mentioned that you really saw Kurt as being the more likely recipient, but why would you not think that you and Craig, your longtime diving buddy, were equally likely?
Well, if you put yourself in our position, we are what I still consider to be two completely normal Australian blokes. We had jobs, we had a slightly unusual hobby, which, in a 1,000,000-to-1 opportunity was the one hobby that was to be useful for this rescue that we're involved in Thailand, and that's, the reason we became well known. But that didn't represent a lifetime of campaigning against some great social injustice. We hadn't been a victim of some terrible act. You probably don't like to use the word victim, but You know, we weren't fighting for some cause. We were just in the right place at the right time, and we just happened to have this skill which could be of use. And so we did what we felt anyone with that skill set would do, and that is to go and help 13 boys stuck in a cave in a remote place. And frankly, it was an adventure as well as a humanitarian act. I mean, we didn't want to miss out on it. We were keen as mustard to be involved. We had even been training for such an event. We'd been practicing locally in Australia and in New Zealand to help prepare for one of our friends or diving colleagues who might get themselves stuck in a cave. And we were desperate to put this training and practice into good use.
So could you even imagine then that there was likely to be this kind of monumental challenge? I mean, for the likes of myself, it seemed incredible this could ever happen, but it sounds like that you actually understood that it's something that you actually could plan for and could actually have strategies for.
This is not an isolated event. You know, people have been stuck in caves all around the world for the last 50 odd years. You know, you go into a cave, the rain occurs unexpectedly, the water comes up, and 1 or 2 people have been stuck in caves. Now, the usual strategy is to either wait for the water to come down, or if you fear that it might actually rise up to a dangerous level, then you send in a diver to take them equipment or help them come out. And that's happened a few times around the world. But the big difference was that those people have been cavers. They've been usually outdoors people. They're in the cave. They're in a place they're comfortable with. This was 13 school kids who were not expert cavers. They were pretty good amateurs, by the way, but they weren't experts. And they had no diving experience at all, and they were 2.5 kilometres underground. So this was a very different proposition. So no, nothing on this scale had ever entered my imagination.
How did you anticipate being Australian of the Year? Were you going to see it as a role? Were you going to take it as an award? What did you do?
Well, this speaks a little bit to the fact we were so surprised to receive the award because, you know, who are we? What do we stand for? And I look at someone like yourself, for terrible reasons, you've got this huge motivation to see social change and try and, say, speak to young people and address attitudes to gender-based violence and so forth. I mean, what an admirable cause to have, not one you would have wished for, but nonetheless very important. But, you know, what about these couple of knockabout blokes who just go cave diving on the weekends? What's it about?
And you got an award for an event.
Doing something we love.
That, you know, and let's face it, you probably wouldn't have been standing there if the rescue hadn't been successful. Although all of the qualities of that you needed to draw on, you fronted up regardless. And then you're thrust into that spotlight. How long did it take you to work out how you were going to approach it? Did you get together with Craig and say, how are we going to do this, mate? Or did you just work it out for yourselves and do your own?
Well, the first warning came from one of the people in the Australia Day Council who said, so you'll need to prepare an acceptance speech. I mean, she was saying this to everyone. And obviously that's the first opportunity you'll really have to have this national platform to address the things that you feel strongly about. Okay, what do I feel strongly about? And so I really had to come up with my cause, which is a bit embarrassing. I mean, you know, but at the same time, what a great opportunity to reflect on, you know, what do I stand for? What do I believe in? And I very quickly realised that things that I am passionate about are things that I perhaps could use to motivate or influence other people in a positive way. And that is, you know, risk-taking in a sensible way, adventuring, and kids. And by bringing those three things together, I hope that I could send a positive message, not just to children, but probably more likely young parents, to let them relax a little bit and let their kids have a bit more scope for adventuring without that terror that we all have as parents that something terrible is going to happen to our child. So I hope that message has got out there a little bit. And I've actually received a lot of thanks from maybe people more my own age to say, you know, thank goodness the voice of reason in this very risk-averse world. We need risk to grow and develop. It's a very important part of human development.
Did you feel the pressure of the expectations placed on you?
Oh yeah, absolutely, very, very much so. There's a huge pressure to now pick up this gauntlet and run with it and to do something admirable with it. So there was a bit of soul searching to do to work out how I was going to use this, because you feel that, I mean, you're told this is an award, not a role, but you have to do something with it. It's such a huge honour, and I do believe that it was a massive honour.
What is surprising is Australians of the Year can cop backlash. Adam Goods, myself, Grace Tame would have experienced this as well. As a hero, as somebody that rescued 13 boys in a cave in Thailand, I can't imagine there would be any possibility for backlash. But was there any? Was there any kind of surprises that you couldn't have anticipated?
Look, I think the short answer is no. We were, again, very, very lucky to be, the flavour of the month after this rescue. And I think about yourself and Adam and Grace, who are the three big examples that I've seen in the last decade of people who have every right to be given that award, because for all the right reasons you were awarded that, and yet immediately divisive in our population, which actually made me furious to watch what happened to you, Adam and Grace. That people are so worried about what they represent, or so worried about their own views or feelings, that they have to go on the attack and attack the person.
And we don't ask to be nominated, do we?
No, it's not your fault.
It's not like we put our hand up and said, pick me. No. We actually haven't been, somebody has nominated us and we've been chosen, and whether we feel that we're worthy or not, we step up to the plate and give it our best shot and try to make a difference. And it's really quite surprising, I think, that the degree of backlash. I don't think anyone expects it and is prepared for it, but it's certainly quite inevitable on so many levels.
Well, it speaks volumes to the strength of character of you, Adam and Grace, for example, that you can actually not just survive that, but actually stand up proud and speak out and fight that. And watching Grace over the last 12 months, she's so powerful and yet so fragile. I've got nothing but respect and admiration for what she's doing.
You look for the positives and don't look for the negatives. I think that's the...
Yeah. My skin would not be thick enough, I have to say. I would really suffer under that tirade of abuse. And, I remember coming back from Thailand, and overwhelmingly social media was lit up with positive thanks and gratitude and so forth. But I remember one little comment from an anaesthesiologist in the USA who just said something critical about the drug doses or something that I'd used to anaesthetise the kids. And I just thought, there it is, Imagine if just one of those boys had died. I think the whole experience would have been very different, and I'm sure I wouldn't have been Australian of the Year, and I definitely would not be talking about my experiences in Thailand, perhaps if even one of those children had died.
So let's go back to how it all began. Where were you when you heard about the boys trapped in the cave in Thailand?
It was actually just a tiny little snippet in the local paper here in Adelaide to say that, 13 boys and a soccer coach caught up in a cave in Thailand. It was like a square.
Just a little snippet.
Yeah. And that was on the first day that they'd been discovered to be missing. And because of my love of cave diving, because I'm involved in volunteer cave rescue in Australia and had been for some time, of course I took interest in it, and I had some contacts in Thailand. One guy in particular, Ben Raymonence, who's a Belgian expat who lives and runs a diving business in Thailand. I'd done a dive expedition with him and with Craig actually the year before. So I just got on the messaging with Ben and said, what's going on? Are you involved? Anything we can do to help? And so that's how the conversation started. And then the two British divers arrived a few days later. Again, it's a pretty small pool of people, cave diving, particularly in the sort of exploration level of cave diving. So I knew those guys, and again, reached out to them, said, let us know if Australia can help from a cave diving perspective. And that's how we ended up there, basically.
So when you did finally get the call to say, yeah, we need you, what was it that they asked you to do?
Well, Rick Stanton, one of the British guys, actually came up with the idea of sedating the kids to get them out, because by that stage they had realised that really there was no other plan that was going to work. And in fact, they were looking at essentially leaving the boys in the cave. And
how many days had passed by this point? Because
they were found at day 9.
Day 9.
So they had no food whatsoever for 9 days. They were just sitting on this flat bit of mud, not much bigger than sort of the distance between you and me. Essentially in the dark. They had some torches that they were conserving the light from, and just drinking the water in the cave. So they were pretty thin.
You know, you can make plans. You think you know what's ahead of you, but what was it like to see the boys' faces?
You know, Rick Stanton on the phone call, which was the last time I had a conversation with him before we left, actually said to me, I can hear you're a little bit excited about the idea of coming on, but I just want to give you a word of caution, is that you're going to swim to the end of the cave and see these boys, and they actually look quite well at the moment. They're healthy, they're quite smiley and happy, and then you're going to turn around and leave, and there's almost certainly no way we're going to get them out alive, so they're all going to die. So just think about that before you rush in. And so when I finally swam into the cave to visit the boys to do a medical assessment with Craig, Rick's words came back to me very powerfully, because they were exactly as he described. You know, they looked fantastic. They looked like healthy young boys. And, you know, I've got 3 kids of my own, and so you couldn't be impacted on the idea that, you know, I was fine. I was going to be able to swim back to the entrance of the cave and go back to the hotel that night. But if it started raining that night, no one was going to get back in there to get them. And so the clock was really ticking. You know, the forecast was that we had about 3 days to get them out. And that's probably the thing that convinced me to give this a go, even though I genuinely didn't believe it would work.
Because their other alternatives were going to be more suffering and a worse outcome.
Yeah, well, the only other option was to leave them where they were, which meant they would die of starvation and exposure or infection over the next couple of weeks. And, you know, you can't turn your back on them. You've got to try something.
Got to try something. So getting all the children out, obviously alive, would have been an utter miracle, and you'd never anticipated one of them living, never mind all 13. But you did, and they did all. Did it feel like a miracle? Or, I mean, how does it feel when you've actually achieved what you set out to do? Is that disbelief or just exhaustion? Or
I mean, exhaustion overwhelmingly the first couple of days, because, you know, after 4 days of having a few hours sleep a night and then being in the cave for 12 hours a day and then late night meetings with the Thai government, you know, exhaustion was definitely the number one sentiment. But yeah, I'm not religious, so I don't tend to use the word miracle, but what I do think, and I can kind of explain now in retrospect how this worked and why it worked, even though everything I knew about anaesthesia and cave diving told me that there were 100 reasons why it would fail. So what I put it down to is just, you know, a bunch of very practical, very courageous people rolling up their sleeves, being very much experts in their field and giving this a crack, and, you know, an extraordinary piece of teamwork as well, and very well coordinated by all the people outside the cave. And when I talk about teamwork, I'm not just talking about the 12 or 13 cave divers, I'm talking about the thousands of people around the site, on the mountain, and in offices around the world, you know, supporting with complex logistics this enormous undertaking. So whilst we were kind of the tip of the spear, if you like, this was, there were so many people involved which made this a success. So again, you know, kind of embarrassing to be labelled as the, you know, the heroes of this rescue, when for me, actually, the heroes of the whole thing were those kids themselves. I mean, imagine the courage of those kids. And
I was thinking, if I was one of those boys, how did you pick the first? How did they pick the first boy? The first boy who had to completely trust and put himself totally in your care. How did that person appoint himself, or did they draw straw? You know, how did that?
I don't know.
Come about?
I don't think, despite the fact that we explained to them via the Thai doctor who spoke English, despite the fact we explained to them what the process was going to look like, I don't think they really had any understanding of how dangerous it was, or how bizarre or unprecedented this idea was. So I don't know whether they were all fighting to be first or fighting not to be first, but what I did say to this doctor was that, look, for our own morale and confidence, we need to test this system, and the best way to test it is to have the strongest, fittest, biggest boy to go first. So could you make sure that happens, and then maybe end up with the smallest, weakest ones last, because by then we'll have given it a good rehearsal. Now, unbeknownst to me, that whole message became ignored, and it turned out that the kids chose amongst themselves who would go first, and they actually decided on who would go first based on who lived the furthest from the cave, because they assumed that when they got out they'd have to ride their bikes home. So again, I think that demonstrates they didn't really understand the plan too well.
Celebrating one of the greatest rescues of all time.
The euphoria of the day was squashed with bad news from home. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, my father died around about the time that the last kid came out of the cave, and so after 4 very hard, very draining, physically and mentally draining days, came out to this success, and of course hugely euphoric, although exhausted, as I mentioned. So there wasn't really a big celebration that night. Everyone was too tired, so we all drifted off and went back to the hotel, and I rang Fiona, my wife, as I had been doing each night, just to tell her I was safe and where we're up to. And I guess the adrenaline overtook me a bit, so I was sort of chit-chatting away for about 10 minutes, telling her everything that had happened, and then I sort of drew breath, and she suddenly burst into tears and had to tell me the news that Dad had just died in the nursing home, where he'd only been for a couple of weeks. And of course I was devastated, and being so tired, it was very hard to kind of understand this news that had happened on this, what should have been the best day of my life. And my father and I were very close, and all my life I've aimed to be like him, to be honest. He is a very kind person who everyone really loved. So I was just shocked that he could have just died so suddenly. And I decided to stay in Thailand for the next few days and just celebrate what we had achieved and celebrate his life all in one. So boy, did we party. It was very good.
You actually grew up in Adelaide, not far from here. What was life like growing up?
Oh, very, very privileged. I mean, I was a very spoilt boy. I had a father who was a doctor, so again, good stable income. So always had food on the table, always had a house to live in. Went to a good school.
Brothers and sisters?
Yeah, 2 older sisters who, were very, very close still, very loving family. And I was blessed with the fact that my parents would take us on, classic Aussie summer holidays, rent a beach house somewhere, and we'd go and just spend the days fishing and snorkelling. And that's where I really developed my love of the ocean and diving very, very early on.
So as someone who's never tried it, and I'm fairly sure I never will, what attracted you to the sport of cave diving?
Well, it was a natural progression from ocean diving for me. I mean, I still get the same buzz every single time I put that regulator in my mouth and stick my head beneath the water and realise that I'm breathing underwater and I can swim around. I mean, it's just such a cool thing to be able to do. And I can remember as a kid being fascinated by the things I couldn't do or touch or see. So like when I was out in this little boat with my dad and he was happy catching a few whiting for dinner, I was always looking at the islands going, yeah, but Dad, why don't we get a bigger boat and go out there, and I'm sure the fish would be bigger out there, and maybe we'll catch a shark or something like that. Oh, no, we're fine just in here catching our whiting. And then I found the same with my diving. I just wanted to go a bit deeper or find something that, go to a reef that no one ever went to before. And cave diving opens up all those opportunities for exploration. It's really the last place on our planet that you can genuinely be a first in terms of exploration. I can look at a mountain through a pair of binoculars and I can plan the way I'm going to go up there, or I can look at something through a satellite photo and decide my route into there. But in a cave, until you physically put your feet in the cave or start walking or swimming through the cave, you don't know what's around the next corner. It might be a solid wall, or it might go for 10 kilometres. And that thrill of exploration and finding something new that you're the first person to clap eyes on is very, very exciting.
you've developed strong relationships with the Thai rescuers and the boys. I mean, we've all obviously been experiencing COVID over the last couple of years, but have you been back and visited and kept connections with everybody?
I've been very lucky to go back twice to visit the boys now. Craig and I and our families went back about 8 months after the rescue. Very much a government level kind of organised trip where we did a bit of soft diplomacy and got to see the boys and so forth again, which was great. But just before Christmas, I had an opportunity to go back and catch up with the kids again, and also some of the volunteer rescuers from Thailand, and that was really gratifying. I had a meal with the kids and some of the parents. First time I'd really got to sit down with the parents and talk to them about their experience and what that was like for them. There were a few tears, I can tell you. It was pretty emotional, and I think my connection with those kids and the mothers especially will be lifelong. Yeah.
And I mean, we'd all like to think that life has gone on really well for them and they've all recovered fully and no ongoing health issues. How would you describe them?
The kids seem totally normal to me. I mean, they're a bit famous now. You know, they are celebrities in their own right in Thailand, and I think there are some significant expectations being put upon them. You know, they've been given this second chance at life, and there was a bit of a large investment made in their lives at the time. So I think they need to be model citizens and be the best people they can be. So there's a bit of pressure on them, but they seem to be coping well, and they do seem to be like normal kids, you know.
Rightly so. You've been lauded for your bravery in Thailand, in both Thailand and Australia. What does bravery mean to you? Do you feel it's character or circumstance?
I think it's equal measures of both, but circumstance is certainly important. You know, for me, courage and bravery means to do something that you're actually afraid of, not to do something that you enjoy doing and are comfortable with. And that's why I don't feel like being the label hero or courage or bravery really applies to us, because we never felt at any great risk for our lives in that cave. You know, this is something we do on the weekends for fun. We wouldn't normally dive in a cave that was actively flooding. So, you know, our senses were on high alert, I would say, but I never thought that I was going to die while I was doing that rescue. So
you didn't really feel that you were putting your life at risk to save others?
No, not really.
You were very experienced, you knew what you were doing, you understood the environment that you were going into, and you prepared for it.
I mean, the one thing I think I am proud of for myself is finding the courage to make the decision to go ahead to give that sedation, even though I truly believed it wouldn't work. And even that, you know, it was a very binary decision. I either do it, and consequences for me personally might be bad, but to not do it and walk away would seem much harder to do. And just to leave those kids to die that dreadful death was just not an option.
It's been wonderful speaking to you, Dr. Harry Harris. Thank you for joining me on 1+1.
Rosie, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.